Hey, welcome back to another episode of Genuine Questions. I wanted to go back a couple of episodes because I know we took a detour so I could talk about why I don't like Bill Gates and Dr. Fauci. But if you go back to the episode before that, we were talking about the lockdowns that started in the spring of 2020. And the government had no problem limiting a lot of our constitutional rights, like our ability to go to church and for businesses to operate at the way that they want. And also there were anti-lockdown protests that were going on that were blamed for spreading the virus, even though the nurses who were counter-protesting, so they were also outside protesting during a pandemic instead of staying home on their days off, they were held up as heroes, but the anti-lockdown protesters were the ones who were spreading the virus. There was a lot of media narratives that if you would go to a Trump rally, that was a super spreader event. It was a Trump rally that killed Herman Cain. But when the summer rolled around, then we started to have these Black Lives Matter protests that were not responsible for spreading the virus. Those were okay. And that is what I want to start off talking about today. And I want to start with this clip of Jim Jordan questioning Dr. Fauci about why all these other activities are limited because they spread the virus, but for some reason, when it comes to Black Lives Matter protests last summer, those do not.
Well, 500,000 protesters on June 6th alone.
Yeah.
I'm just asking, that number of people, does it increase the spread of the virus?
Crowding together, particularly when you're not wearing a mask, contributes to the spread of the virus.
Does the government limit the protesting?
I don't think that's relevant to.
Well, you just said if it increases the spread of the virus, I'm just asking, should we limit it?
Well, I'm not in a position to determine what the government can do in a forceful way.
Well, you make all kinds of recommendations. You
No.
make comments on dating, on baseball, on everything
No.
you can imagine. I'm just asking you just said
Yeah.
that protests increase the spread.
No.
I'm just asking you, should we try to limit the protests?
No, I think I would leave that to people who have more of a position to do that.
No limit to protests, but boy, you can't go to church on Sunday.
What was the,
I don't know how many times I can answer that. I'm not going to opine on limiting anything. I'm just going to tell you.
You've opined on a lot of things, Dr. Fauci.
Yeah, but I've never
This
said
is
to
something that
limit
directly impacts the spread of the virus, and I'm asking your position on the protest.
Yeah, I'm not going to opine on limiting anything. I'm telling you what it is, the danger. And you can make your own conclusion about that. You should stay away from crowds, no matter where the crowds are.
Government has stopped people from going to work. In fact, just in New Jersey 4 days ago, Ian Smith, Frank Trombetta were arrested for trying to operate their business, their gym. They were arrested. Do you think that's okay?
You know, I'm not going to opine on who gets arrested and who does not. I mean, you get where I'm going. I'm telling you, as a public health official, I say crowds.
Do you see the inconsistency, though, Dr. Fauci?
There's no inconsistency, Congressman.
So you're allowed to protest, millions of people on one day in crowds yelling, screaming, but you try to run your business, you get arrested? And if you stood right outside of that same business and protested, you wouldn't get arrested? You don't see an inconsistency there?
I don't understand what you're asking me as a public health official to opine on who should get arrested or not. That's not my position. You could ask it as much as you
you've
want,
advocated for
and I'm
certain
not gonna
businesses.
answer it.
You've advocated for certain businesses to be shut down. I'm just asking you on your position on the protest. And we know the protest actually increased the spread of the virus. You've said that.
I said crowds. I didn't say specifically. I didn't say protests do anything.
So the protests don't increase the spread of the virus?
I didn't say that. You're putting words in my mouth.
No, I just want an answer to the question. Do the protests increase the spread of the virus?
I don't have any scientific evidence that anything. I can tell you that crowds are known, particularly when you don't have a mask, to increase the acquisition and transmission. No matter what the crowd is.
So you don't have a position on whether the protests increase the spread of the virus or don't increase the spread of the virus?
I'm saying that crowds, wherever the crowds are, can give you an increased probability that there's going to be acquisition and transmission.
But do you understand Americans' concern? Protesting, particularly according to the Democrats, is just fine, but you can't go to work, you can't go to school, you can't go to church There's limits placed on all three of those fundamental activities,
Legitimate.
First Amendment activities, but protesting is just fine.
So the point that I think Jim Jordan successfully makes there is not that Fauci has the power to limit the protest, but we shut down all sorts of other activities and constitutional rights because those things contribute to the spread. So why isn't protesting being limited? And you can't say that it's a First Amendment right because they've shut down other First Amendment rights and they've criticized other types of protests. This is the one protest that not only is not shut down, it's praised. The Democrats aren't making that argument that, hey, protesting is a constitutional right and you can't shut it down. One of the Democrats actually says under oath that the protests do not contribute to the spread. And we're going to listen to her say that.
I would like to place two reports into the record. One is from Forbes, and it's entitled, "Researchers Say Protests Did Not Increase COVID-19 Spread, but Republicans Are Still Blaming Them." This is one report. And I have in my hand here, I have a report and a study from the National Bureau of Economics Research that was published last month. And this study found that there was no connection between Black Lives Matter and protests in recent months and increased spread of the coronavirus.
So going to a Trump rally definitely spreads COVID. Going to a Black Lives Matter protest does not, according to the political science that the Democrats are putting out. But something that I did notice last summer that I thought was interesting is that they've really covered all their bases, because even if they find out that coronavirus does spread at these protests, they've already did a study, apparently overnight, that shows that tear gas, the use of tear gas, is what is spreading the coronavirus during these protests. So, and I just find that very interesting because now, like I said, their bases are covered. If the coronavirus is being spread at protests, it is the police's fault, not the fact that they're outside protesting during a pandemic. And this video here is no commentary on what I think the merits of their protesting are. I believe it's about systemic racism, and I actually will agree with them on that I do think systemic racism does exist in this country. Where they lose me on this argument, though, is when they say that in order to dismantle the systemic racism, I need to vote for the Democratic Party and people like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, who have been in office for like 40, 50, 60 years, and they are the main architects and perpetuators of the systemic racism that we are trying to dismantle. I think getting rid of those career politicians who have orchestrated all of this over their decades-long careers, I think that is the best way to dismantle the systemic racism, not just vote them back into office and then hope they do everything differently than they've historically done during their careers. And I've had people argue with me that if you support Black Lives Matter, that's not supporting the Democratic Party, but I beg to differ. I believe in the statement, of course Black lives do matter, but the Democratic Party and the Black Lives Matter organization are linked, and I'm going to show you what I mean. I took this video this morning, actually, and screen recorded it, so the font's a little bit small to see, but if you want to test this out, this was current as of this morning, so you can get on there and do this yourself. But if you go to the Black Lives Matter website, which is right here, blacklivesmatter.com, and you go over here and you click on the donate button, it still looks like you are on the Black Lives Matter website, But if you look up in that URL, it took you to actblue.com, which is the fundraising organization for the Democratic Party. So your donations to Black Lives Matter went to electing Joe Biden. To me, one of the biggest instances of systemic racism that you could take at face value is Joe Biden's discrepancy for sentencing with crack versus cocaine. So I'm not inclined to think that I am really doing a lot to help the Black community by voting back into office the man who destroyed their community during his entire political career. One of the things that I have heard ad nauseum over the past 5 to 6 years that's incredibly frustrating is that Donald Trump is a racist and anybody that voted for him did so because they're probably a racist too. And the evidence that I've always been given when I've asked why people think that goes back to things that he said in like the 70s. Like less than 10 years after the civil rights movement, he wasn't willing to rent apartments to Black people. And of course, in the era that I grew up in, that is horrible, but people do evolve over time. And the modern day evidence of him being racist seems pretty flimsy to me. A lot of the time, because you bring up things about how he has gotten the largest percentage of the Black vote for a Republican in history. You bring up the First Step Act, the opportunity zones, the funding for historically Black colleges and universities, and people will tell you, well, he's just doing that because he wants to get elected. And maybe so. I don't know what Donald Trump's private thoughts are when he lays his head down at night and goes to sleep, but if the way that his racism manifests itself is he tries really hard to pretend that he's not racist and does good things for the Black community so he can get reelected, I'm okay with that. Because to me, that's not racism, that's pandering. That's what politicians do. They want people to vote for them. So you want a politician that's actually going to do things to get you to vote for him, not just pander to you and feed you lip service, which I believe is what the Democratic Party is notorious for doing. Lots of empty promises. They talk the talk, but they never walk the walk. And I'm going to show you this montage of Joe Biden saying a few comments. And I picked there is a lot of comments from Joe Biden that you can look back through over his entire political history. I don't want my kids to grow up in a racial jungle, all kinds of stuff. I picked just a couple here that he's actually said in modern day times, like on the campaign trail last year, to show that juxtaposition of Joe Biden hasn't evolved from any of the stuff that he said. He actually continues to say it into the present day. And obviously he is not coming out and being overtly racist. It's that racism of lowered expectations. You'll notice that he uses poor and Black a lot as synonyms.
We have this notion that somehow if you're poor, you cannot do it. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, Black kids, Asian kids. He's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
I've had a great relationship. In Delaware, the largest growth in population is Indian Americans moving from India. You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.
I also remember when he talked about how Barack Obama was such a Cinderella storybook fairy tale because he was the first clean, articulate Black man that Joe Biden had ever seen. So That's the kind of stuff that Joe Biden says on a regular basis. And it wasn't just in 2020 that we had this decision to make, because we can go back to 2016 and watch Hillary Clinton get called out for this type of pandering on The Breakfast Club. And again, she doesn't go on there and try to talk to the black community and tell them how she's going to improve their lives or what program she's going to put in place for them. She goes on there basically like, hey, I'm cool, I listen to Beyonce, and that's pretty much all that you need to know, vote for me. And they call her out and say, it's going to sound like you're pandering to black people here, and I'll just let you listen to how she responds to that.
What's something that you always carry with you?
Hot sauce.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you getting information right now?
Hot sauce.
Hot sauce in my bag, Swag?
Hot sauce.
Really?
Yes.
Now listen, I
yes.
just want you to know, people are going to see this and say, okay, she's pandering to black people again.
Okay. Is it working?
This is all I'm going to do for you, is throw you a Jay-Z and a Beyonce concert, and that's really all I have to say. That's all I think of you, and that's all I expect you to care about or think about. And that says a lot of what their mindset is towards the black community. But also on The Breakfast Club, fast forward to 2020, was this gem from Joe Biden. And it is last summer, right before all the protests start, where he says that you ain't black if you don't vote for him. And we're going to listen to it, but the fact checkers and the media tried to cover this one up, saying that he was joking around and that he was doing it because he was listing off his credentials on what a great leader he's been throughout his career to the black community. And so I'm going to show the clip in a little bit larger context than you normally see, because I want people to understand that that is not what Joe Biden was talking about. He was being asked if he was going to pick a black woman as his running mate, and he didn't really want to answer that question, so he pretends like he has to go because Jill Biden needs a studio, as though on some planet the wife of the presidential candidate's interview might supersede that of the actual candidate. But that's the excuse that he gives, that Jill's going to be real mad because she needs the studio, so he has to go. And so the host says to him, he said, okay, well, and you could tell he's disappointed that Joe Biden's cutting the interview off. And he says, okay, well, it's a long way to November. I hope you come back on because we have more questions to ask you. And that's when Joe Biden says, more questions? Listen, if you got a problem figuring out whether you're going to vote for me or Donald Trump, then you ain't black. So he's not listing off his accomplishments to the black community. He's actually trying to duck a question, and then is getting snippy with this guy for daring to call him out on it and question him as a leader. And then Joe Biden goes in to list off all of his credentials about how he's been endorsed by the NAACP every time he's ran, which none of those things are true.
I want to ask you about your running mate. I don't know if you saw. Well, I saw the day that the news report broke that Amy Klobuchar was being vetted, and a lot of people on social media, they're not too happy about that. And it's because they want your running mate to be a black woman. I don't know if you saw the op-ed in the Washington Post by some of the leading black women voices in this country, and they feel since black women are such a loyal voting bloc, and black people saved your political life in the primaries this year, they have things they want from you, and one of them is a black woman running mate. What do you say to them?
What I say to them is that I'm not acknowledging anybody who is being considered, but I guarantee you there are multiple black women being considered. Multiple.
Well, you
Thanks so much. That's really our time. I apologize.
You can't do that to black media.
I can't do that to white media and black media because my wife has to go on at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Oh, I'm in trouble.
Listen, you got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden.
I will.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none. The NAACP has endorsed me every time I've run. I mean, come on. Take a look at the record.
So it doesn't get much better once Joe Biden actually did get elected. We are going to listen to some audio here of a meeting between one of the Black Lives Matter's leading activists and Joe Biden. And in the first clip, you are going to hear the question that the woman asks him. And basically what she is asking for is something akin to the sex offender registry, but for police officers who have been accused of brutality and excessive force and misconduct on the job. So that way they can't just get passed around from department to department with no accountability. And I don't think that's an unreasonable request at all. I think that's actually a really good idea and something that we should implement. So let's listen to her ask this question and ask Joe Biden to use his authority as president to make that happen for them.
We would ask you to lend your voice and your strength and your influence and your power and your ability to reach across the aisle to try and pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. But failing that, we would ask you to pull from that act measures that can be enacted by executive order. You have the power to call for a national database on police misconduct. You have the power to ask for a registry that will allow people to easily search in public multiple misconduct complaints against particular officers. You have the ability to impose a database around police killings and police shootings. And these are things that you can do by executive order.
So now we are going to be treated to Joe Biden's answer to her. If it sounds a little bit choppy, it's because I got this audio from a podcast and they kept pausing it to discuss the things that Joe Biden was saying to this woman, and I cut all of that out, so we just hear the audio straight through of Biden, and let's just listen to what he says, and then we'll talk about it afterwards, because there is a lot to unpack on this one.
I've got to go. Let me respond. There's a lot to respond to here. Let's get something straight. You shouldn't be disappointed. What I've done so far is more than anybody else has done this far. Okay? Number one. Number two, I mean what I say when I say it. I mean what I say when I say it. I'm the only person who's ever run on 3 platforms that I was told could not possibly win the election, and I never ceased from it. One was on restoring the soul of this country because of what I saw happen in Charlottesville. That was it. No one else was talking about it. The words of presidents matter. Nobody else, no progressive, was talking about it. I did. I'm the first person, black or white, who called attention to the fact that you were finding that there was the rate of people who were African Americans who are dying was 3 times that of white people. I don't carry around a stamp on my head saying progressive and I'm AOC, but I have more of a record of getting things done in the United States Congress than anybody you know. Anybody you know. Anybody you know. By 2040, this country is going to be minority white European. Hear me? Minority white European. And you guys are going to have to start working more with Hispanics, who make up a larger portion of the population than y'all do.
So I think the end of that is the best part, where he tells her that you better start being nice to Hispanics because they're about to become the majority of the population. So we're going to start pandering to them. You don't have to yet. You don't have to get along with Hispanics yet. Just be aware that here in a few years, they'll be the majority and then they'll be the ones in charge. Because that's all that we do is just pander to whatever group is going to get us the most votes and put us in power. So I love that he admits it, and it's just a little cherry on top that he admitted it while going on an irate rant at a Black Lives Matter activist. And I also noticed in there too that basically his whole answer to her was, I gotta go, I can't be bothered with what you're asking me right now, but I said Charlottesville was bad, so what else do you want from me? That's basically Joe Biden's answer to this woman, is I already said Charlottesville was bad, and you better start being nice to Mexicans, because they're going to be in the driver's seat here in a couple years. That is the way that Joe Biden talked to the Black Lives Matter activists after they are essentially responsible for getting him elected, depending on how you want to look at that scenario. So as always, I have to take part of this episode to criticize the media's role in all of this and how they are perpetuating this racial divide in our country. Because really, I think that that is the main goal of these career politicians, is to keep us divided and distracted so we don't realize that it's them, the career politicians, who are enriching themselves off of our backs and doing nothing to make our lives better, that they're the problem. So if regular people all banded together and booted them out of office, their cushy, privileged lifestyles would be gone. So the method is to divide and conquer, and the media helps them do that. And one of the ways that I noticed them helping perpetuate this divide and these false narratives, and why they have no one to blame but themselves when they get called fake news, is there's a prime example of it right here. So truthfully speaking, I do not remember which specific case this one took place during, where a man was shot by a police officer. And CNN airs the footage of the victim's sister and says that she is calling for peace. And then they cut the video about halfway through her remarks to make it sound like she is calling for peace. But just like the Nick Sandmann and the altercation with the Native American, there is more to this video that they cut off and intentionally did not show the public.
Family and friends holding a vigil marked by prayers.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
With his sister calling for peace.
Don't bring the violence here and the ignorance here. Take that to the suburbs. Burn that down. We need our we need our weed. I don't wear it, but we need it. We need our gas. We need our food. Y'all don't understand that. We need that. Y'all want to hurt somebody, take that farther out. Don't bring it here.
So she's not really calling for peace at all. She's calling for them to go burn down a neighborhood that she doesn't live in, because she doesn't want her stores to be destroyed and out of business and her neighborhood to be inconvenienced. But also on CNN, you'll see a quote that I hear a lot and I think is very true, is if you want to know how the Democratic Party feels about minorities, look at the way they treat one who thinks differently than them. And this is a clip of Don Lemon's show, Prime Time on CNN, where they are using racial slurs to talk about Kanye West because he committed the thought crime of supporting Donald Trump.
Kanye West is what happens when Negroes don't read. And we have this now, and now Donald Trump is going to use it and pervert it, and he's going to have somebody who can stand with him and take pictures.
He's all of a sudden now the model spokesperson. He's the token Negro of the Trump administration. This is ridiculous, and no one should be taking Kanye West seriously. He's clearly has issues. He's already been hospitalized.
So why are people not allowed to just have their own thoughts and opinions? I didn't think that black people were any more monolithic in their opinions than white people. So who decides which person is the token person? Why is it not people on the left who are the spokespeople for that political cause? Why are they not the token minority on their side? Why is it only that if somebody has a conservative opinion or supports Donald Trump, then it's okay to use racial slurs about them for thinking differently? Why can't they just have their own opinion? Even if you think it's wrong, why is it okay to talk about somebody like that and use that kind of language when talking about somebody strictly because they're on the opposite side of the political aisle? And that's not the only instance that I saw on CNN that I thought was pretty racist. The thing that they're talking about on Don Lemon's show there is Donald Trump invited Kanye West and a few other predominant figures in the black community to come meet with him in the Oval Office and did like a photo op for it. And Chris Cuomo covered it on his show. And I did not know that it was considered news for Chris Cuomo to look at still photographs of Donald Trump and attempt to read Donald Trump's mind.
My curiosity wasn't about what came out of Kanye's mouth. My wonder went to what was going on in Trump's head. Let's take a look at him. Here's my educated guess, okay? Other than a warm serotonin flush of happy hormone, imaginary headlines, blacks love Trump. He's blacker than Obama. Then came this.
It was something about when I put this hat on, it made me feel like Superman. You made a Superman. That's my favorite superhero. And you made a Superman cape for me.
I certainly agree. This is a cartoonish situation. But look at Trump here yet again. Yeah, Superman. Sure I am. I can do anything. I can save people. I wonder if images of Hurricane Michael came into his head then. The people that do need saving. And here he is, doing this.
So I didn't hear Donald Trump say anything racist at all in that news clip. If anything, it was Chris Cuomo who was saying that racist stuff and thinking those racist thoughts. You can't just say it and say, oh, I bet this is what Donald Trump's thinking, because the only mouth I heard that come out of was Chris Cuomo's. So I don't understand how you could watch CNN and not notice that yourself. You don't even have to watch Fox News or be a Republican or a Trump supporter. How can you listen to them say that and not realize how they are gaslighting you and manipulating you and giving you their opinions about things, their racist opinions about things, and trying to pawn it off on Donald Trump? And back to what we were saying before about the left owning all sides of this argument. All last year, even not just politically, but in regular conversations, it was hard to have these discussions because, again, they owned all sides of the argument. If you are a white person who was speaking up about these issues, then you are being a white savior. You're making it about yourself. This is not your time to talk. You need to pass the microphone, somebody. But then if you didn't say anything at all about it, then your silence is violence. So it really puts you in a damned if you do, damned if you don't type situation, and it's hard to know what the best way to have these conversations is, and a lot of times it's based on the individual and who you're talking to. So what might work with one person could make another person think that you're just a racist piece of crap. But one of the people who I think put it very eloquently, as usual, is this old clip from Trey Gowdy where he talks about some of the issues that he noticed when he was a prosecutor and this notion that people tend to treat white lives differently than black lives.
Do you know, as a former prosecutor, or can you deign what may have been the biggest impediment to our being able to successfully prosecute homicide cases, particularly homicide cases involving victims of color?
In Massachusetts, one of the biggest impediments is trying to get witnesses to come forward.
You're exactly right. You have a victim of color, and we had trouble getting witnesses to cooperate with law enforcement and prosecutors which then, as you know, diminishes the quality of that case and your ability to prosecute it, which may result in a lesser plea bargain because you don't have the facts, which may then result in what you said in your opening statement, which is people have a tendency to treat black lives differently than white, when the reality is the case wasn't quite as good. Isn't that a possibility too?
For every prosecutor who's out there, this is a serious problem, and you are correct in pointing that out, sir.
Right, and I happen to have a fantastic chief of police when I was the DA. Fantastic man by the name of Tony Fisher. And he lamented the exact same thing you and I are talking about, is the loss of life in his community and the refusal of people to cooperate, even in a drive-by shooting of an 8-year-old at a birthday party. A drive-by shooting outdoors where the whole world saw the car drive by, and nobody would cooperate with the prosecution in the murder of an 8-year-old. So I hope that part of this 21st century police strategies conversation that we're having includes getting people to cooperate with law enforcement so you can hold people to the exact same standard regardless of the race of the victim.
I've said several times in these videos that I don't really care that much about politics, and I can't stress it enough that I don't. I think there is good ideas and bad ideas on both sides, and I don't think that either party has a monopoly on being good and virtuous and right all the time. And there's the logical fallacy that people talk a lot too about, the ad hominem attacks, where you can't really criticize what the person's ideas are, so you just attack them as a person, sort of like kill the messenger. And to me, that is what these arguments are, when people just start pointing the finger at the other party and saying, well, Republicans are racist or Democrats are racist. There are racist people in all political parties. But that was one of the things that made me really concerned starting a few years ago and really wanting to start paying attention, because I started to hear this idea that everyone that disagrees with me is a racist. And people are so willing to cut people out of their lives and dismiss them now without even having a conversation because they are so blinded by this propaganda. So to finish up here, just one last very quick quote from Trey Gowdy, where he makes the great point that you can't read people's minds. So if we have a problem with somebody politically, we should discuss why their idea is not good for the country or for certain groups of people who are going to be negatively affected by it, as opposed to just smearing these people as racist or Nazis or whatever evil term we can use to demonize them. So as always, thanks for watching Genuine Questions, and tune back in for the next episode.
Among many limitations in life is my inability to glean other people's motives or be able to read their minds. So I would just caution you to be careful when you try to import motives to people.